A cold wind sliced the dawn as Amos Reed urged his sorrel mare along the fence row, the horse's hooves stirring frost from sagebrush into drifting clouds. Every breath came in ragged puffs, and the bridle leather creaked under the weight of early spring's chill. Sage Hollow stretched before him, rolling hills quilted in drab green and brown, dotted with bleached bones of winter's toll. Amos scanned the skyline for his scattered cattle, recalling the sting of his father's last words before the homestead torpedoed under drought and debt. Keep them alive, Amos, whatever it costs. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've got something extra special saved just for you. He guided the mare to a split-rail fence, rails bowed and cracked under heavy snow's memory. There, beneath a lonely cottonwood, he spotted something that twisted his gut. A young woman, bound at wrists and ankles with coarse twine, seated on a rail as if suspended between world and wilderness. Her hair, dark as raven's wings, rippled across a torn blouse stained with dust and blood. Amos dropped the reins and approached slowly, every instinct screaming to retreat, yet every principle urging him forward. She lifted her head, eyes wide as storm clouds, and Amos froze. A crude note pinned to the fence read, "Father's justice for what she did." The handwriting, spidery and uneven, reeked of desperation. Amos glanced at the woman's hollow cheeks, the dull ache on her bruised arms, and a thread of memory knotted in his chest. His sister's tear-streaked face before she vanished beneath similar vengeance. He swallowed hard, jaw aching with unspoken guilt and lingering loneliness. Kneeling, Amos brushed snow from her shaking shoulders. "Ma'am," he said, voice hoarse with shock, "you're safe now." The rope cut into her skin like regret. He drew his knife, blade darkened by years of honest labor, and sliced through the knots with swift, sure strokes. Each snapped fiber was a small liberation. She sagged forward, and Amos caught her before she hit the ground, pressing a wool blanket from his saddlebag around her thin frame. Her lips parted to form a name, Lila. The syllable drifted into the wind, hesitant and trembling. Amos set her on a fallen log, loosened her boots, and cradled her head in his hands. "Father?" he asked, but she shook her head, eyes filling with unshed tears. A single drop splashed into Blanket's gray wool, dissolving into warmth. He tilted her chin up and saw a flicker of defiance in her gaze, strength born of suffering, unbowed by fear. He led her to a low rise where the sun's first rays painted the ground gold. "We ride back to the ranch," he said, voice firmer than he felt. She nodded, lifting her legs over the saddle's cantle with quiet determination. Amos climbed up behind her, arms wrapped around her waist to support her weight. The mare whinnied, her breath misting in the cool air. Amos patted her flank. "Easy now," he murmured, reins loose to let her find her own way. They set out toward the homestead, a cluster of weathered logs and stone foundation set against ancient pines. Amos's mind churned with questions. What had she done to deserve this? Who dared dispense such cruel justice? The note's venom tasted old and bitter on his tongue, igniting rage he barely restrained. Lila leaned into his back, her breath warm beneath his shirt. He patted her arm in silent promise. He would not leave her. By the time they reached Sage Hollow Ranch, the bunkhouse door creaked open and Samuel Dunn, the ranch cook, stepped into the yard with a skillet in one hand and alarm in his eyes. "Amos!" "Who's this?" he exclaimed, wiping grease on his apron. Amos dismounted, lifting Lila from the saddle. Snow and dust caked her boots. Her blouse lay torn at the seam. Amos blocked Samuel's follow-up questions. "Help her inside," he said, voice low. "Bring water and bandages." Samuel nodded and hustled Lila toward the bunkhouse while Amos secured the mare. He paused at the fence, running a hand along rough pine rails where Lila had sat hours ago, rails now marked by her struggle. He closed his eyes, tasting regret. For the years he'd spent alone, for the sister he couldn't save, and now for this girl left to fate's mercies. The wind sighed through the hollows, carrying echoes of his promise. Inside the bunkhouse, Samuel laid Lila gently on a straw-filled cot. Amos fetched fresh water from the well, its bucket muttering against the rope. The kitchen stove crackled, sending a ribbon of smoke through the chimney. Amos returned to find Lila's eyes closed, chest rising with soft, uneven breaths. He knelt and dipped a cloth into water, pressing it to her fevered forehead. She stirred, her dark lashes brushing dust-laden cheeks. Amos offered a tin cup of warm tea, heraldry of care in this unforgiving land. She sipped with trembling fingers, then set the cup aside. Amos studied a faint scar at her collarbone, too soft for a man's blade, and realized this girl bore more than physical wounds. She carried a past tangled in blood and betrayal. He rested a hand on her shoulder, silent in a hush of smoke and dawn's pale light. Outside, the ranch's hounds bayed in welcome, a chorus of loyalty in the new day. But beyond the bunkhouse windows, dust kicked up again and Amos's heart sank. A lone rider silhouette outlined against sunrise, broad shoulders and stiff posture. Watched Sage Hollow with intent. Amos drew a slow breath, the ranch's promise of safety rattling like an empty shell. He met Lila's eyelids fluttering open, and in her eyes he saw his own question mirrored. Would they come for her? As the rider spurred closer, Amos rose and crossed the window, Colt drawn and resolve hardening beneath his duster. Lila watched from the cot, tea untouched at her side, hands knotted with quiet strength. Amos pressed a finger to his lips. No alarms, no empty reassurances. They would face whatever came together. And as the rider's horse neighed by the fence, Amos slammed the window's shutter shut, securing both door and destiny against the dawn's looming threat. A low groan stirred the bunkhouse as dawn crept over Sage Hollow, wisps of mist curling around the log walls like silent ghosts. The stove's embers hissed in greeting, and Amos Reed stirred in his bunk, wool blanket rasping under his callous hands. Outside, a lone pine needle tapped against the roof, each tap a metronome to the cold, silent stirrings of morning. Amos rose, stubbing his boot against the floorboard to chase sleep from his veins. He crossed to the cot where Lila Hart lay, her skin pale beneath dust-streaked sheets and eyes closed in restless slumber. Amos crouched and lifted her wrist, the skin taut over faint ridges of rope burns. He dipped a clean cloth into a tin cup of water and pressed it gently to her forehead. Lila's lashes fluttered, her breath quickening as pain sharpened behind her eyelids. Amos's jaw tightened, the bunkhouse's rough quiet pressed around him like a burden of regret. He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small flask of whiskey, bitters for pain and courage both. With careful hands, he cleansed each wound, then applied salve mixed from pine pitch and tallow, its acrid sweetness sealing flesh and memory alike. Lila's eyes opened, dark orbs flickering with confusion and trust. She swallowed, voice hoarse. "Thank you." Amos offered a tin cup of sweet tea, roots and burnt sugar steeped through the night's chill. She drank, each slow swallow a fragile thread reknit. Her gaze drifted to Amos's side, where a tarnished pocket watch lay on his belt, its chain catching the dawn's weak light. She gestured. Amos picked it up, turning it in his palm. "My pa gave this to me before the drought took the farm," he said, voice low as dust. "Said time's all a man's got." He slipped the watch into Lila's palm, its weight an anchor between them. Her fingers closed around it, a token of shared grief and unspoken kinship. Lila sat up, blanket pulled at her waist. Amos built a fire in the iron stove, sparks dancing into the smoke-blackened rafters. He roasted coffee beans until the scent curled through the bunkhouse. Samuel Dunn, the cook, poured the brew into tin mugs. Lila cradled the hot cup, letting the warmth seep into her frost-lipped fingertips. Samuel cleared his throat. "Kin tracks below the north pasture," he warned, voice low. "Looks like Turner's boys, maybe Earl himself." Amos froze, heart hammering beneath stoic calm. Lila set her mug aside. Shadows sharpened behind her eyes. "My father gambled away the land," she said, voice brittle. "When he owed too much, he blamed me for his ruin." She pressed the pocket watch to her chest. "He left me here bound, so he could ride back to the bar." Her words trembled, not with fear, but rage tempered by grief. Amos folded his arms across his chest, with smoke drifting between them. Outside, the wind stilled as a bitter chill settled in. Amos and Lila stepped the corral fence, where hoofprints cut shallow grooves in the thawing earth. They traced the tracks together, wide and narrow prints side by side, signs of horses ridden by desperate men. Lila knelt, brushing mud from one print. "They'll come straight to the bunkhouse," she said softly. "Father won't rest until he claims what he thinks is his." Amos's jaw set. He raised a hand in oath. "Then we make sure he doesn't." Back inside, Amos fetched his Winchester and clipped a spare cylinder of cartridges from his belt. He laid the rifle across the cot's edge, each spent shell a memory of battles fought and losses mourned. Lila rose, boots creaking on the floor, and draped a wool blanket across the door's wooden bar, a silent guard against the rising threat. Amos secured the latch, its iron cold and true. He glanced at Lila, determination reflected in her dark gaze. Samuel hung fresh quilts on pegs near the stove and loaded the cooking hearth with logs. The clan of crows had nested in the pines beyond pecked at early berries, their calls distant warnings of the coming storm. Amos boiled a pot of stew, dried beef and wild onions, aroma sharp with promise. Lila stirred the ladle, offering both warmth and nourishment. Each spoonful was a gesture of trust, a bond sealed over shared necessity. As dusk bled into twilight, a solitary figure approached the door. Thomas Hart, Lila's older brother, face gaunt and eyes hollow with disappointment. He crumpled a fresh note in his hand. Turned twig would nail to the bunkhouse door, its message hopelessly clear. Amos pried it free and read aloud, "Return my daughter by dawn, or the ranch is yours." The words etched themselves into its smoke and shifting shadows. Thomas's gaze flickered to Lila, filled with equal parts sorrow and obligation. "Father gave me orders," he whispered, voice thick. "I can't let him think I failed." Lila reached for his hand, but he stepped back. Amos stepped between them, rifle pressing into loose dirt at his feet. "She's under my roof now," he said, voice firm. "You want her, you'll have to take this place." Lila swallowed, heart pounding like a tremor. She placed a pocket watch on the table, a gamble of time and trust laid bare. "Take it," she said, eyes unwavering, "but leave me with my life." Thomas stared at the watch, then at Amos and Lila standing side by side. At last, he closed his eyes and shook his head. "I can't," he replied. "Dad's debts and his demons are bigger than that." He tore the note to shreds, letting it drift into the stove's flames. "I won't ask you to run, Lila, but you'll break his heart." With that, Thomas turned in the chill dusk and strode into the pines. Amos locked the door behind him. The keys clicked final as fate's decree. He crossed to Lila's side and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into his warmth, her breath steady but tense. Outside, the crows fell silent as night draped the ranch in shadows. In the hush before dawn, Amos and Lila sat by the hearth. Each sip of stew a vow to stand firm. Samuel snapped fresh logs into place, embers flaring in the gloom. And beyond the bunkhouse walls, kin tracks vanished into the thickening woods, echoes of the past that would not rest until they'd run or fought. In that silent company, Amos and Lila prepared for the choice ahead, to let fear dictate their fate or to forge their own path beyond the valley's rim. A sharp rap echoed through Sage Hollow as dusk fell, each knock ringing off the bunkhouse walls like a pistol shot. Amos Reed's hand tightened on the Winchester at his hip. Samuel Dunn froze by the window, shotgun poised. The fading light slanted across rough-hewn logs, dust motes dancing in amber shafts. Lila Hart pressed the pocket watch to her chest. Its dull tick a heartbeat of resolve. Outside, two silhouettes waited in the gathering shadows. Kin come to reclaim their debt. Amos strode to the door and threw it open. Silas Hart, Lila's uncle, stood on the porch, spurs catching the last rays of sun. His broad brim shadowed a weathered face, eyes hard with contempt. At his side, a lean ranch hand held a rifle, barrel glinting. "Reed," Silas said, voice rough as gravel. "You harbor my niece under false pretense. I reckon she belongs to me until her father's gambling debt is paid. Hand her over or pay in kind." Samuel stepped forward, with smoke swirling around him. "She's not property," he spat. "She's safe here." Silas sneered and spat tobacco juice on the floor. "She's family," he growled. "Blood debt runs deep." He tapped the rifles, but with a gloved finger. "I aim to collect." Inside, Lila rose from the bunkhouse cot. She forced her shaking limbs to stand, pocket watch clenched in her fist. Her dress was torn, but her chin was high. "Uncle," she said quietly, voice steady, "I won't go back. You threatened to marry me off to settle debts. You drank your chances away, left me bound to die. I choose my own fate." She stepped beside Amos, cloak pooling at her feet. Silas's jaw clenched. He sneered at Amos. "You and your charity ain't half man enough to honor Kin's claim." He squared his shoulders. "Either she ride with me, or I burn this place down and every soul in it." Amos rose, rifle barrel level with Silas's chest. "You'll find no justice in burning innocents," he said, voice low but fierce. "You threatened her life once. Do it again and you answer to me." The bunkhouse's logs groaned as the threat settled into each corner. Samuel moved behind Amos, every muscle coiled like a spring. Lila's heart pounded, each breath an echo of the past trauma. She recalled her father's ring, his gambling debts, and the night he bound her to a fence rail under moonlight's cold gaze. She brushed a lock of hair from her face and met Silas's gaze. "That debt ended with Pa's last draw from the deck," she said. "You have no claim." She lifted the pocket watch for all to see. "This belonged to him, and to me. Take it as my debt paid." She tossed the watch on the floor between Silas and Amos. Silas hesitated, eyes flicking to the tarnished metal, then to her defiant stance. The ranch hand's rifle trembled in silent threat, but Amos's steady gaze never wavered. In that pause, dust drifted through the doorway like motes of mercy. Guests of blood and fear waited on a razor's edge. Then, with a snarl, Silas barked an order to his ranch hand. "Search the barn. She's hiding there." The ranch hand lunged past Amos toward the outbuilding. Amos fired a warning shot into ground, a sharp bark that cracked the stillness. Splinters leapt from the sill as the ranch hand ducked back. "We run," Amos shouted. "Get her to the corral." Samuel seized Lila's cloak and ushered her into the yard, while Amos leveled his rifle at Silas. The uncle surged forward, hand dropping toward his sheath. Amos fired again, bullet ripping a gash in the corral's rail, splinters spraying like sparks from a forge. Silas halted, reevaluation in his narrowed eyes. In the corral's pale dirt, Lila's pulse pounded in her ears. She drew a spare blanket from a saddlebag, an old quilt patch by hand, and wrapped into a ragged figure mounted on a fence post. The makeshift decoy's form mimicked a riding woman, cloak swirling in the wind. She stepped back as Samuel mounted border, Amos swinging into the saddle of his black mare, Knight's Edge, the rifles but tucked beneath his leg. Lila climbed up behind Amos, pressing her weight against his. Samuel tossed her a canteen of water, and she tucked it into her satchel. Amos leaned forward, whispering, "Hold tight. We ride to Whispering Hollow." The name slipped across her mind like a promise of sanctuary among wind-carved cliffs. Silas cursed and spurred his horse. "I'll burn your hide, Reed," he shouted. The ranch hand recovered his rifle and aimed at Amos's mare. Amos nudged Knight's Edge, urging her forward. Samuel followed, shotgun braced. Lila's scarf billowed behind her in a banner of defiance. At the corral's gate, Silas cracked a shot. The bullet whined past Lila's ear, scraping her ear with a breath of wind. She bit back a scream. Amos twisted in the saddle, revolver drawn, and fired into ground before Silas's horse. The horse reared, silencing Silas's shouts. The ranch hand hesitated, tracking Amos's next move. Lila pressed her forehead to Amos's shoulder, grit and tears mingling. Her breaths were shallow. Amos steered Knight's Edge through the gate, hooves sending dirt flying. Samuel kicked his mare into a canter, bored her snort lost in the wind's roar. Silas and his man launched after them, hoofbeats thundering into twilight's limbs. They galloped past the homestead's log walls, heading east toward the creek where Whispering Hollow's narrow entrance yawned. Lila clutched Amos's duster, each jolt of Knight's Edge echoing her heartbeat. A thread of memory knotted inside her. The pocket watch's tick, her aunt's soft lullaby, the sting of rope cutting into her wrists. Now, she clung to this outlaw bond as fiercely as she clung to life. Amos guided the mare along a faint trail flanked by pine and juniper. The sky deepened indigo, stars glinting through slender branches. Ahead, the hollow's mouth loomed, rock shelves stacked like ancient sentinels. They plunged through the narrow pass, the whisper of wind through stone a lullaby of hope. Behind them, a single shot cracked, Silas's parting promise. The bullet splintered a rock beside them, sending pebbles skittering. Amos spurred Knight's Edge into deeper cover, hooves stirring powdered moss. Samuel stayed close, his rifle scanning the darkness. Inside Whispering Hollow, shadows pooled beneath high walls, and the trail forked toward hidden caverns. Amos reined up Knight's Edge in a moonlit glade. He slid from the saddle, blood staining his side where the bullet grazed his coat. Samuel dismounted, alert and steady. Lila slid down, knees wobbly, and Amos caught her. He pressed a hand to her cheek. "We're safe here for now," he whispered. She nodded, breath shivering in the night air. She tucked the pocket watch back into her dress, its silver surface innocent in the moonlight. The threat had passed, but only for one night. As dawn's first gray warmed the hollow stones, Lila and Amos sat before a small fire, tea sizzling in a tin cup. Samuel dozed against a boulder. The trail of dust back to Sage Hollow lay hidden beyond the hollow's curve. They rested, two wounded souls bound by choice and necessity, each drawing strength from the other's quiet presence. Yet beyond the hollow's edges, the world waited with unfinished business. Amos pressed a finger to the pocket watch's face. "We ride again," he said softly. Lila nodded, eyes bright with resolve. Together, they would face kin's wrath, law's judgment, and the scars of betrayal. But tonight, they had won a fragile reprieve. And as Whispering Hollow's walls swallowed the echo of hoofbeats and gunfire, the pact between Cowboy and Runaway glimmered like starlight. Survival was theirs to claim, one shared dawn at a time. A jagged wind sliced through Whispering Hollow as night deepened, rattling loose stones down narrow ledges that echoed like distant gunfire. Amos Reed hunched beneath an overhang of weathered granite, the brim of his duster collar raised against swirling grit. Each breath he drew tasted of damp rock and looming threat. Beside him, Lila Hart crouched low, hands brushing the ridged sandstone where she had hidden carved markers, tiny scratches only she could read, to guide them to the hollow's maze of secret trails. Samuel Dunn, saddle slung across his back, waited behind a boulder, rifle cradled in the crook of his arm. They crept along a fissure barely a man's width, the path dipping into cool shadows where moonlight dared not venture. Lila's bare heels patted silently. Her dark braid flicked like a banner of defiance. She paused at a narrow notch in the rock face and raised a whispered hand. Amos leaned forward, framing her shape in the torchlight. Grace under pressure, a living promise against the canyon's cruelty. She pressed a finger to her lips, then slipped into the crevice, the world shrinking to her measured steps. Amos followed, the river of moonlight above them a fragile thread guiding his descent. Each rock underfoot was smooth as a memory, each breath a confession. He thought of his brother, lost of thirst and fever when drought withered Sage Hollow springs. The grief that had driven him from his own homestead now drove him to protect this brave girl who had reclaimed her will from betrayal. Deeper in the hollow, they emerged onto a stony terrace, a bowl of pale sand ringed by towering walls. Lila signaled Samuel forward, torch in hand, and he scanned the ridge's lip. Below, A lone scout crept along the canyon floor, rifle slung low, eyes scanning for movement. Amos presses back the wall. The scout's silhouette flickered in the torch's glow, a hungry shape hunting ghosts. The scout raised his rifle. Moonlight glinted on the barrel as he took aim. Amos stepped forward, Colt extended in his right hand. The scout shot rang out, harsh, sudden, and round grazed Amos's left shoulder, ripping through fabric and flesh. A hot line of pain seared across his ribs. He hissed, pressing a hand to the wound, where blood welled beneath his fingers. Lila sprang to his side, shawl abandoned in her haste. She knelt, her own pulse racing like hooves on hardpan. Amos pressed his free hand against her wrist. "Go," he gasped. "Get us out." She shook her head, tears glinting in the torchlight. "No," she replied firmly. "You saved me once. I stand with you now." Samuel lobbed a rock toward the scout, shattering a boulder's edge and drawing his attention. Seizing the moment, Amos fired a warning shot into the ground before the scout, who staggered back under startled hooves. The canyon silence swallowed his curses. Amos steadied his breathing, but pain throbbed with each heartbeat. Lila rose, determination carved on her face. She reached into her pocket and drew the tarnished pocket watch, their shared talisman of time stolen and hope reclaimed. She pressed the watch to the wound, where the catch had torn flesh. Her gentle fingers smeared the watch's silver surface with Amos's blood. The watch's tick slowed, then settled into a pulse in her hand. "We bind our fates," she whispered, voice hushed as a prayer. "Time stand with us." She closed the watch and tucked it into Amos's coat, the weight now both burden and shield. Amos nodded, eyes moist with gratitude and pain. Lila pointed to a narrow chute carved by winter's melt, a final passage from the hollow. "This way," she urged. Each step was a labor, Amos leaning on Samuel's shoulder as they moved. The trail ascended, walls closing in until they burst onto a high ledge overlooking a hidden valley, bowl-shaped and lush, untouched by drought's malice. Moonlight spilled across grassy meadows and a ribbon of spring-fed creek, a cradle of promise. They sailed beside the creek's bank, Samuel pressing a clean cloth to Amos's wound while Lila cupped water for him in her hands. The creek's murmur mingled with a sigh of wind through cattails, the first lullaby they'd heard this night. Amos leaned back on a flat stone, breath easing, as the blood-soaked watch glinted at his side. Lila knelt, laying a fresh bandage over his shoulder. Each careful fold of cloth was an unstated vow. Beyond the valley's rim, the scout's distant curse trailed off into pitch dark. Whoever pursued would find only canyon walls and empty tracks. In the valley's hush, Amos closed his eyes, every fiber of pain eased by the creek's cold kiss. Lila pressed her hand to his, her fingers brushing the watch's edge, a reminder of shared time and shared sacrifice. Samuel gathered the last embers of small fire they'd lit against the chill. He stoked it with mossy twigs, the glow chasing shadows from Lila's resolved face. Star by star, night surrendered to deeper quiet. Amos lifted Lila's chin, meeting her steady gaze. "We made it," he said softly. "Because of you." She shook her head, cloak pooling at her knees. "Because of us," she replied. The creek's lullaby and the river of stars bore witness to their bond, born of rescue and sealed by blood and iron. On the creek's bank, Lila buried the pocket watch beneath a cairn of stones, a silent sentinel marking the moment they reclaimed both time and destiny. Each stone laid was a brick in their refuge, each breath a promise. They would endure. As dawn's tender light brushed the valley's edge, their silhouettes stood together, a cowboy and a runaway, bound by ordeal and hope. Whispering Hollow held their secret, a sanctuary carved in stone and sustained by courage. In that hushed hour before daybreak, Sage Hollow and its debts lay far below. Here, in this hidden vale, Amos Reed and Lila Hart found not only safety, but fragile kind of peace, threaded by strength, woven by trust, and cradled by the land that had tested them both. A rumble shook Whispering Hollow as dawn bled the sky, a low tremor rolling through rock shelves and rattling loose stones from the heights above. Amos Reed steadied himself against jagged granite, the pain in his shoulder flaring with each breath. Beside him, Lila Hart's eyes gleamed in the pale light, steel and hope fused by adversity. Samuel Dunn crouched behind a boulder, rifle trained on the canyon mouth. Through the rising mist, they saw the kin's ragged silhouettes emerge. 5 men, anger and obligation etched into every step. The final confrontation had come. Lila pressed her ear to the cold stone, heart synchronized with the hunt. "They'll step onto the trap," she whispered, breath visible in the chill. She had spent the night arranging a cluster of boulders on a ledge high above the pass, stones wedged like silent henchmen awaiting command. Amos nodded, Winchester cradled in his arms, readiness concentrated in his bones. Samuel stood ready to cover their retreat. Each knew their roles. Lila's cunning, Amos's shot, Samuel's steadfast guard. The kin advanced into the narrow floor, voices low with grudging determination. The rider who served as scout halted beneath Lila's ledge. She gave a single nod, signal and promise. Amos squeezed Lila's hand, then stepped back into the shadows. Samuel's finger tensed on the trigger as the scout raised his rifle, unaware he was about to topple from predator to prey. Lila's boot kicked the root of the topmost boulder, dislodging it. The stone groaned and plunged down, colliding with others in a thunderous cascade. Rocks and dust exploded along the pass, horses rearing and kin stumbling beneath rain of rubble. The scout's rifle clattered to the ground, echoing silence as each man scrambled for cover. Amos loosed a warning shot into the air, steel singing across the canyon. The kin, disarmed by nature's wrath, retreated beneath the rock slide's billowing dust, stumbling to the gloom to safety or defeat. Amos limped forward, each step sending lances of pain through his ribs. Lila reached him, shawl trailing dust, and anchored his elbow. "We move," she urged. Samuel guided them to a hidden alcove where they'd stashed saddlebags and provisions. Amos sank to a ledge, chest heaving with pain. Lila tore a strip from her scarf and bound his wound tighter, her fingers gentle and fierce. Samuel poured water from a canteen, and Amos drank, grit against his teeth. The valley's hush enfolded them, a fragile reprieve earned with courage. Once he steadied, Lila led them deeper into Whispering Hollow, past a narrow chute that opened into a lush glen where the creek murmured among willow roots. Samuel gathered kindling. Amos leaned against a smooth stone, breathing the hollow's cool air. Lila knelt by a cluster of mossy rocks and retrieved the tarnished pocket watch from its pocked hiding spot. She placed it in Amos's palm. Its dull took a testament to every stolen moment they had claimed. "Our time," she whispered, "sealed by this land." Amos closed his eyes against the tears that stung like cedar smoke. As dawn melted into morning, neighbors from Sage Hollow emerged at the glen's fringe, riding through drifted snowbanks and muddy trails, offering grub of coffee and jerky, blankets and nails. They formed a circle of 8 around the wounded cowboy and the runaway girl, voices low and earnest. Amos and Lila accepted each gift with nods and murmured thanks. Samuel shook hands with ranchers' wives, trading stories of rescue and refuge. The kin had been driven off, their threat powerless before community's mercy and nature's vengeance. By midday, the glen bustled with life. Amos directed men to fell trees for cabins. Lila guided women planting roots in patches cleared by winter's end. Samuel organized patrols to guard the hollow's entrances. Each task stitched their refuge tighter into the land's fabric. Neighbors worked not out of duty, but a belief in what Amos and Lila had earned, a promise of sanctuary free from betrayal. As twilight approached, Amos and Lila sat on a log by the creek's edge. Water slipped through smooth stones and whispered currents, each ripple a vow of continuity. Lila pressed her palm to Amos's, their fingers interlaced over the wood. "We stand together," she said softly. Amos tightened his hold, gaze fixed on the creek's surface that now bore no blood, only reflections of shared sky. 10 years later, Whispering Hollow thrived, a cluster of snug cabins ringed by olive meadows and orchard saplings. Under a spring sunrise, Amos Reed, the once lonely cowboy, strode across a wooden footbridge, duster dusted with pollen. Lila Hart followed, homespun dress bright with wildflowers, cradling a basket of first strawberries. Samuel Dunn, now affable ranch foreman, guided neighbors shepherding lambs to new grazing fields. They gathered by the old Glens Creek, where the first cabin, a 2-room log structure, still stood beneath ancient stones. Amos placed a steady hand on Lila's shoulder as she pointed to a mossy patch where no watch or wound remained. That space was sacred ground, the pocket watch buried and forgotten, its promise now woven into every budding leaf. Neighbors and newcomers, orphans, fiddlers, ex-soldiers, gathered to trade news and laughter, forging a future built on compassion instead of vengeance. Amos led the crowd in a modest toast, 10 cups tipped to rising sun. Lila's smile held the glow of 1,000 dawns. Samuel raised his mug with a roguish grin. The Hollow's bell, hung at the community barn, tolling for morning chores, echoed like a song of unity. Each ring carried the memory of 2 fugitives who had dared to defy kin and fate, carving refuge from cold rock and robber's law. And as the creek murmured its unending lullaby, Amos Reed, Lila Hart, and Samuel Dunn stood at the heart of Whispering Hollow, partners in redemption, kin by choice, a testament to the truth that even in the harshest frontier, courage and kindness could carve a sanctuary that time itself could not erode.